also you raise is doing to fulfill the financing need. My name is Masood Karim. I work for daily job in climate change and Rohingya issues
for holding credible investigation.
And resilience of the Bangladesh people came across strongly.
Knowledge that do we have any human right problem in Bangladesh is my number one question, and the recommendation we have made.
Request Her Excellency Michelle Bachelet to give her deliberation.
Good evening, and thank you all for coming, and excuse us for the delay because we're just ending a meeting, and of course with the traffic and all that is pretty difficult. So I would like to begin by warmly thanking the government of Bangladesh for its invitation. It's, as you know, it's the first time that a High Commissioner for Human Rights has visited the country. I hope my visit will build on the government's engagement with the UN human rights systems and mechanisms and help deepen cooperation with us, furthering the promotion of human rights and the protection of human rights in Bangladesh. My visit coincided with an important day of national mourning, commemorating the assassination of the first Prime Minister of independent Bangladesh, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, on the 15th of August 1975. It was a day which naturally lent itself to reflections on the history of Bangladesh, its painful past, a people's struggle for independence, and for the human rights, millions of whom had been forced to flee in 1971. In my discussion with civil society members and government officials, the sense of pride at this history of resistance and resilience of the Bangladesh people came across strongly. Bangladesh has made remarkable economic and social progress and is aiming to graduate from least developed country, LDC, status in a few years. Starting from a low baseline, Bangladesh has made strides in socio-economic development, poverty eradication, access to education and health, women's and children's mortality, access to food, water, and sanitation. Bangladesh has been a leader in international fora on key human rights issues, such as migration and climate change. It has also stepped up to provide refuge to more than 1 million Rohingya refugees who were forced to flee persecution and serious international crimes being committed against them across the border in Myanmar. Bangladesh also continues to face challenges on the human rights front, and I have been able to discuss many of these extensively with the government and civil society members. In Dhaka, I met with the Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina Wased and the Ministers for Foreign Affairs, Home Affairs, Law, and Education, and other states officials. I met with the National Human Rights Commission and representatives of civil society, as well as members of the diplomatic community and academic. I was able to interact with the students at the Bangladesh Institute of International Strategic Studies on Climate Change and Human Rights. The delegation from my office was also able to represent me in meetings with other stakeholders, including trade unions and political parties. My discussions came against the backdrop of increased economic strains due in part to the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and the globally reverberating consequences of the war in Ukraine. Rising food and fuel prices mean that the cost of living is increasing, and in such circumstances, of course, the most marginalized and vulnerable are hit the hardest. The country's extreme vulnerability to the adverse effect of climate change is a persistent challenge. Bangladesh is also entering an election cycle, with general elections due next year, which tends to be a time of increased polarization and tension. In such circumstances, what is key is that people from various sectors of society are heard, and they feel heard. Civil society members are important resources that governments need to tap into. Critical voices can help to identify the problems, to acknowledge them, to dive deep into the causes and discuss solutions. Acknowledging the challenges is always the first step to overcoming them. My exchanges with civil society representatives were rich and insightful. This was not surprising, as Bangladesh has historically had a wealth of civil society expertise in various fields. But successive UN human rights reports have documented a narrowing civic space, increased surveillance, intimidation, and reprisal, often leading to self-censorship. Laws and policies over-regulating NGO and broadly restricting the freedom of expression make it difficult and sometimes risky for them to function effectively. Democratic and civic space, as well as effective checks and balances and accountability, are essential as Bangladesh aims for the next levels of development. It also contributes to decrease the risk of corruption and other hurdles to sustainable economic development and sound fiscal management. The election period will be an important time for Bangladesh to maximize civic and political space, including freedom of expression, association, and peaceful assembly of political activists, human rights defenders, opposition parties, and journalists. It is also important to ensure that law enforcement forces have the necessary training to manage protests without resorting to the excessive use of force. There needs to be a space for more dialogue among political parties and with a wide range of civil society actors to prevent grievances from building and erupting in social unrest. The voices of women, religious minorities, and indigenous peoples, and especially young people, need to be heard. Women's formal participation in political decision-making processes at local levels has improved in recent years. I also call on the government to take proactive measures to increase the number of women in decision-making positions at all levels. There has been much progress. More and more women have entered the labor force in some sectors, and the country has witnessed improvements in girls' education with gender parity reached in primary schools. But despite the adoption of a number of important national policy frameworks, challenges to gender equality remain. Violence against women, including sexual violence, remains high, and access to justice and accountability for the victims remains difficult. I welcome the government's recognition of Hisharas, and I hope it will take further steps to respect, protect, and fulfill the fundamental human rights of all LGBTIQ+ persons. I stress the importance of protecting minority groups, such as Hindus and indigenous peoples, from violence or land encroachments. The peace accord in the Chittagong Hill Tracts 25 years ago was an important achievement. But given the continued allegation of human rights violations linked with land disputes and the need for demilitarization, I called for full implementation of the peace accord and unrestricted access for independent actors to visit the area. Bangladesh has a solid framework in its constitution, laws, and international commitments to draw from in facing human rights challenges. It is party to all the core UN human rights treaties, except for the International Convention for the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearance, which I have called on the government to ratify. The committees reviewing states' compliance with these treaties have made important recommendations, along with recommendations made through the UN Human Rights Council's Universal Periodic Review process and by various UN human rights independent experts. It is important to focus on implementation of those recommendations and an institutionalized system for follow-up. These recommendations are important benchmark and help strengthen linkages between human rights and the Sustainable Development Goals. Various UN human rights mechanisms, including the UN Committee Against Torture, have been raising concerns for several years about allegations of enforced disappearances, extrajudicial killing, torture, many of which have been attributed to the Rapid Action Battalion and the lack of accountability for such violations. I raised my deep concern about this serious allegation with government ministers and highlighted the need for an impartial, independent, and transparent investigation into these allegations accompanied by security sector reform. There are continued alarming allegations of both short-term and long-term enforced disappearances and concerns about the lack of due process and judicial safeguards. Particularly given the long-standing frustration at the lack of progress in investigation and other obstacles to justice, I encourage the government to create an independent, specialized mechanism that works closely with victims, families, and civil society to investigate allegations of enforced disappearances and extrajudicial killings. And my office is ready to provide advice on how such a body could be designed in line with the international standards. Inviting the UN Working Group on Enforced Disappearance to visit Bangladesh would also show a commitment to decisively address this issue. As the biggest contributor of uniformed personnel to UN peacekeeping missions, Bangladesh should ensure it has a robust system in place to ensure the careful human rights screening on security personnel. I also discussed law reforms to bring domestic legislation in line with international human rights laws. My office and the government have engaged in dialogue on review of the Digital Security Act. I acknowledge the need to regulate the online space, addressing online hate speech, disinformation, and combating cybercrime. Addressing this concern is not simple, as regulating communications always creates risk for the protection of freedom of expression and freedom of press. We have submitted our recommendations for repeal and revision of certain provisions of the Act, with a view to ensuring their compliance with international human rights law and standards and preventing arbitrary application or misuse. We look forward to the government's feedback and timeline to expedite the review. We also discussed the importance of working closely with civil society and the UN to ensure that the new draft data protection law and the OTT, over-the-top platforms, regulations meet international human rights standards. The UN is firmly against imposition of death penalty in any and all circumstances, and I also encourage steps to reduce its scope and move towards a moratorium. During my time in Bangladesh, I also visited Cox's Bazar, where an impressive efforts have been made by the governments, the UN, and other partners in the Rohingya refugee camps. The importance of Bangladesh's humanitarian contribution and its historical significance cannot be overstated. The international community must sustain its efforts to Bangladesh in its response and press Myanmar to create conditions for return, address the root causes, and pursue accountability. These are people who fled extreme violence and systematic discrimination 5 years ago, in one of the largest movements of people in recent history. What I heard in my conversations with women, young people, religious leaders, and other Rohingya refugees in the camps was a surrounding hope that they will be able to return to their villages and homes in Myanmar, but only when the conditions are right. Unfortunately, the current situation across the border means that the conditions are not right for returns. Repatriation must always be conducted in a voluntary and dignified manner, only when safe and sustainable conditions exist in Myanmar. In the camps, I was heartened to see young girls and boys at learning centers and attended lively math and Burmese classes taught by community members. The younger children were energized and spoke of their aspirations for their future. In my meeting with older children, however, there was more frustration at the passage of the time. One boy spoke of the years lost that he will never get back and expressed a strong desire to go back to his country, to contribute to his community, and as I said, and eventually to his home country, Myanmar. Expanding these educational and livelihood opportunities for girls and boys will be the best way to prevent social problems and criminality, and to fully prepare refugees for sustainable reintegration in Myanmar society. The refugees I spoke to in Cox's Bazar, and indeed refugees and internally displaced people I've met in various parts of the world, stress that they do not want to be dependent on aid. They want to be productive, to earn a living, to contribute to society, and improve their conditions of life. I encourage the government to give space to community-led initiatives in the camps in Basan Shar and Cox's Bazar, so that those with such aspirations are able to support and contribute to serving the needs of fellow refugees. Many I spoke to were fearful of the security situation, both in terms of the activity of armed groups and criminal gangs, but also the vulnerability of women and girls. The security and freedom of expression of Rohingya civil society and human rights defenders also needs to be protected. I'm very worried about increasing anti-Rohingya rhetoric in Bangladesh, stereotyping and scapegoating Rohingya as the source of crime and other problems. I'm particularly concerned that a pre-electoral context combined with economic difficulties and uncertainties will mean more hate speech against these vulnerable communities. I call on the government and all Bangladeshis to be vigilant against such harmful rhetoric, to actively counter misinformation with facts, and to foster understanding with the host communities. As Bangladesh continues to grow economically, effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions in line with Sustainable Development Goal 16 are essential for achieving the next level of development. This means inclusivity, participation, and accountability, strengthening the independence of institutions, including the National Commission of Human Rights, the Elections Commission, and the judiciary will be key. The UN country team stands by to support implementation of all SDGs. I hope my visit will further boost Bangladesh's engagement, government and non-governmental, with the UN Human Rights Office and mechanism. Bangladesh will also undertake its fourth Universal Periodic Review in the Human Rights Council next year, which will be an important moment to take stock of progress. It is encouraging that the new Special Rapporteur on Climate Change and Human Rights will visit the country soon. And I want to call on the international community to support Bangladesh and other vulnerable states in their demand for effective climate action. For all the significant human rights challenges ahead, economic, climate-related, political, social, and humanitarian, I am convinced that if the powerful resources within the whole society are harnessed, and policies and responses are crafted with the participation of many diverse voices, Bangladesh will continue to shine brighter in its remarkable development journey. I thank you.
Second one, over the last few years, we noticed that a number of UN rapporteurs.
What can I say? Realize what's your suggestion after this situation?
I'm seeing Al Jazeera.
Thank you for giving me the floor. I won't go into too much detail. I have a few specific questions. Of course, this visit was very importantly for the human rights issues, aside from the Rohingya issues. There was a list of 76 people that were missing, and your office was concerned about that. How did you address that issues? And I know the home ministers and others say these people are not missing. They're either criminals or at least 10 of them were accounted for. Another question is human rights organization here, a leading one, Odhikar, their license was canceled. It's not been renewed. That particular issues. And were you able to see the documentary that just was released by a Swedish-based Bangladeshi, well, it's Bengali portal called The Glass House, in Bengali it's called Ainar Khor. This is particularly about two witnesses detailing about a secret detention that is managed by military intelligence near the cantonment area. Were you able to view that video, or did somebody make that aware to you? Thank you.
Jumur Bari.
Thank you. I'm Jumur Bari from Ekatu Television. From Al Jazeera asked the question, I want to supplement that, but because some human rights organization give you a list of people who are about the disappearance and about the extrajudicial killing. But our government said there is no extrajudicial killing and there is no disappearance. And you said that you have extra mechanism by those you can justify this is right or wrong. What's the mechanism? Because there is our law enforcement agencies, and they say there is no just extrajudicial killing, but you say there is the other people said, and you will justify this. What is your procedure, and what is your comment about our government part? I mean, government said there is no extrajudicial killing, and what do you want to say about this?
This one would like to take another question from AP. He raised his hand.
I would say that about the Rohingyas, if they have hope or not, I think I mentioned it in my statement, the initial statement. I saw hope in. Oh, wait until that's. I saw hope in children. Probably because they arrived. They were children in 5th grade, I think, and they arrived probably younger here, and they still have hopes. but 15, 16, 17, 18-year-old, they feel that because many of them, but it's something that is going to be solved soon, is not having access to education or skills programs. And I understand that they will start soon. They will expand the education in the so-called, with the Myanmar curriculum, that is the one that now is going on. They're going to expand it, so it will, not only the ones who are now, that is first, pre-kinder, first, second grade, 6, 7, 8, and 9, it will expand it to in between and to older ages. But it also will start a program to develop skills, so people can learn skills and can be contribute to many things inside the camps or when they go back to Myanmar and so on. So those young people, they were a little bit hopeless. But those young people being hopeless, if I would say their hope is repatriation. Their hope is to go back to Myanmar because they want to be part of their society. They want to be there. Even one teacher, he told me he was a great student and he had to flee because of the violence and so on. And he wanted to be a medical doctor. And now he's teaching the children in Burmese. But he said, look, I speak with my friends. Now they're studying medicine, they're doing, and I was even a better student than them. So he feels, what it meant to him, the sacrifices meant to him, because if he would have been able to continue there, he might be a doctor right now. So that's the kind, you can feel different feelings for the people. Frustration on ones, but on the other hand, feeling that if they go back, they might be able to take again the life they lost, their dreams they lost, etc. So I think there's both things, hopes and not hope. But there's also fear. If we go back there, what if again we are arrested, detained, raped, victims of violence? So they feel also they want to go back, but they want to go back there where there are the basic enabling conditions for a dignified and safety return. And we say that it also has to be voluntary. You cannot force people to go back. But those enabling conditions are important for two reasons. First of all, because it's their right. Everybody has the right to live in their home in the best dignified way, everyone, because we're all human beings. But on the other hand, because if you make them return forcefully, when the conditions are not there, you will have a new plight of refugees soon. You have had it in so many times in the history. So if those conditions don't change, this will be over and over again. So that's why we have been calling, and in this case I can say I personally been talking to neighboring countries to ask them to use their leverage power to ensure that in the society they create the enabling conditions, that they recognize the Rohingyas as citizens of Myanmar, not as Bengalis without any rights. So those are the things, and they need to ensure that they can go back to their homeland, that they can restore their livelihoods, etc. Because otherwise, they could go for some time and they're going to get back again. So we need to, if it's done, it has to be done right. That's what I would say. On the issue of I would say that I'm not the one to speak to speak on behalf of the government. They are the ones who have to say whatever they think about what we discussed, the proposals that I made them. But for my side, I acknowledge, as I already said, I stress, if I would say, the importance of acknowledging the existence of problems, that it was better to acknowledge, to address them, to make the investigations that were needed. And I also share with them my experiences as former head of state and head of government, and my own experience at Chile, being a country who had grievances similar to the ones. And even my father died in torture in 1974, and the prime minister in 1975. So I can understand her pain as well, you know, because we live situations that are similar in that sense. So I also share with them what we did in my country, how we deal with some issues. And I also share my experience that I always felt when I receive any allegation of any kind, that it's better to say, what if it's true? Because it might not be my policy, but maybe some things are happening. And if I know that are happening, I can do something about it. So that's the kind of conversation we had, to say, look, they might be all not true, but if I hear something, I always, in my case, said, what if it's true? Let's analyze it, let's investigate it and see if it's true. If it's not true, okay, you investigate it, you know it's not true, things are clear. But if it's true, how we remedy, how we take the measures. So that's the kind of conversation that we had. On the, so I think if you say, if I understood rightly the question, first, I am happy to have come to Bangladesh because I think it was an important opportunity for me to visit this beautiful country that has a lot of challenges, not only in human rights. I mean, of course, we speak of economic, social, and cultural rights, so everything is human rights for human rights, but I mean climate change and all economic development, etc., social development. So I think it was for me, it's every time that I visit a country, the possibility of meeting with different stakeholders and to discuss different issues and to listen to their perspectives. They might not agree, the perspective, but that's normal in the world. So to listen to them, to suggest things, to propose things, to hear what they have to say about it, that for me is the importance of a visit. No? And of course, some things might work well, some things might take longer, because you spoke about gender equality, for example. But gender equality, there has been a lot of progress made, but they need to do more. We need to ensure really, and we need to do more on gender-based violence, etc. On the issue of extrajudicial killings, well, I had a meeting with the National Commission of Human Rights, and they gave me the report, last year's report. And in that last year's report, there are cases named by the National Commission of Human Rights on all of these issues: extrajudicial killing, enforced disappearance, and torture. So there is not only the information that comes through civil society, the UN treaty bodies that have for a long time, the Committee on Torture, Enforced Disappearance, etc., but also even the National Commission of Human Rights has, and I read what they wrote there, they also acknowledge there are some cases, maybe not all the cases. There was only the report for 2021, and they also said torture and death in custody. So it is. So these are the kinds of things that that in some way there has been acknowledged by some institutions, international institutions and national institutions as well. And I hope that the proposal recommendation that we have given and that the UPR has given and all the committees of the UN has given could be implemented. I think this would be really important. So because the other thing, what suggestions we do is we have been suggesting that it's important to have more national dialogue. The international context is very complicated. The COVID-19 produced a lot of consequences, health, social, economic. The war is creating more consequences that will increase people's problems. So I believe, because I am a Democrat, that when you have problems, the whole spectrum of political parties, civil society, will think on the country. We should get together, dialogue, and see, yes, we are under difficult circumstances, we have this climate change. How can we be able to identify 4, 5, 6 things we all agree on and we can push together? You might think I'm naive, but I do believe in that. And I've tried to do it in my whole life as a politician. to try to get to a national dialogue, to try to get to certain agreements. You're not agreeing on everything, you don't agree on everything, but at least what can you agree on, particularly when you're going into election time. I understand election time is about differences, but it's also about saying, we all love our country, what can we do A, B, or C that are really essential to move forward so everybody can benefit of that. And I think also the people of the countries, they feel when they see that the politicians can be together and have something in common, they feel they could start trusting politics. They can start trusting institutions because they feel that even they have differences, they are able to get together. And also when you can agree on something, you can also agree how to disagree. how you solve with things you disagree. So, so I think that especially when many economic challenges will come, I think something should be put aside, and there should be certain agreements to be able to move forward with everyone. So let me try to understand the last thing. Oh, if I think that it will be Gaza Strip? No, I don't know. I mean, I don't know why you make this comparison, really. You're talking about, that's what I asked you about Cox's Bazar, being a Gaza. No, what we did see, I mean, what we did heard, we don't see, is a concern about security issues inside. Because, as you probably know, in September was killed Mullah Bala, the leader of the Rohingyas, and this was really, really felt with a lot of sadness, and I'm not sure somebody has replaced that role as a leader that really plays a role. And there has been some murders, somebody has appeared, and the police is investigating who is the ones who are behind these things and why these things happened. And I think the Rohingyas are really concerned about this. They feel insecure. They feel insecure to go out in nights. And I'm talking not to party, I'm talking to go to the washrooms, you know, because some people have been kidnapped and some people have been killed. They're not many, but it's happening, and it might be related to certain groups or maybe tensions inside. But there's all histories, nothing that we can have evidence on this. Some people say that different gangs, or there can be some gangs related to drug. But to be honest, I don't see any relation with Gaza, any relation. But of course, security needs to be reinforced and needs to be discussed how you ensure the security of all those men, women, etc. We don't have enough information what happened with those people who were kidnapped. Is it women who have been trafficked? I don't know. And I don't want to go into inventing things that I cannot tell. But I think it's something that I have raised with the RRRC and with government in terms of which are the kind of situation that they know about it, but that the refugees raise with me. So I compare it to the authorities as well, so they can take measures on that.
Thank you, Excellency. Dear media colleagues, we have some time constraint. If you have further questions, please send it to me. I'll forward it to Excellency's office so it gets answered. So we conclude here. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We have a modesty outside the room. Please, sir.